Hi, my name is Kathy Pudiak, and I want to welcome you to my webinar about mind-body medicine. You'll be learning about mind-body medicine's interesting background, the science behind it, and about the very effective ways to use your mind in a way that supports good health and healing. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the information in this program has the potential to change your life. I myself use many mind-body therapies and techniques and have been for many years. I've had to deal with a lot of stress professionally as an oncology physician assistant and personally as the caregiver of several family members suffering from serious illnesses. These therapies have changed my life by helping me keep focused on the present, grateful for all the positive things in my life, and have helped me physically as well. During my career, I encouraged my patients to participate in mind-body therapies, and of those who added them to their treatment regimen, they too have benefited. The definition of mind-body medicine is the field of medicine concerned with how the mind influences the body, and conversely, how the body influences the mind. But in this program, I'm only going to focus on the way the mind influences the body and our health. So now let's define the mind. The mind is that part of us that's the source of all our thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and emotions. Sigmund Freud divided the mind into 3 levels of awareness: the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. For our purposes, we're going to focus only on the conscious and subconscious. The conscious part of the mind is analytical, logical, and makes choices and decisions. The subconscious mind is the seat of our emotions, memory, beliefs, and instincts. And the body, as you know, is made up of 11 different systems, such as the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, the nervous system, etc., all working together to keep us alive. So exactly how does the mind influence the body? You're already very familiar with some of the more common effects. When, let's say, someone embarrasses you and your face flushes immediately, or you know you have a big meeting with your boss and your stomach feels like it's turning inside out, or you just think about having a hot flash and then one starts. These are all physical manifestations of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Exactly how this works and how we can make use of this interaction to our advantage is the key, and what you're going to be learning about tonight. But before we get into the science of how all this works, I want to give you some of the really fascinating background of this field of medicine. Hippocrates, Aristotle, and Moses Maimonides, among others, did believe that the mind had a strong influence over the body. And in China, the connection between mind and body is and has always been the basis of their traditional medical practice. In fact, the thought of them being separate is actually absurd to a Chinese medical practitioner. But on the morning of November 10, 1619, the French philosopher René Descartes awoke from a dream that convinced him that the mind and body were completely separate and distinct entities with no connection. According to Descartes, and then later Sir Isaac Newton, bodies are incapable of feeling of thought, and the mind is involved in feeling only. And they also believed that all the systems of the body were completely separate with no communication between them. This became a widely held view at that time. But eventually, there were physicians and scientists like Charles Darwin, interestingly enough, who returned to the earlier belief, but it took hundreds of years for the concept to gain traction again. Now let's fast forward to modern times. In 1980, a very interesting study was done with rabbits. They were put into 2 groups, both on the same low cholesterol diet, but the experimental group was individually petted, held, talked to, and played with on a regular basis. The control group was treated in the usual way. Measurements of coronary artery disease, cholesterol levels, heart rate, and blood pressure were made. At the end of the experimental period, both groups had similar measurements. But the group receiving the special one-on-one attention showed more than a 60% reduction in the amount of coronary artery disease. Then later, Dr. Dean Ornish, a leading physician and researcher in healthcare from UCSF, published his famous study on heart disease in human subjects. All subjects had what was referred to as bad genes and severe coronary artery disease. Dietary changes were instituted, as well as stress management techniques, which included breathing techniques, meditation, progressive relaxation, and imagery. Patients were asked to practice the techniques for at least 1 hour a day for 1 year. No cholesterol-lowering drugs were used. The results show that 82% of the subjects had reversal of their disease, while the control subjects showed progression of disease. Also, the experimental group had a 91% reduction in the frequency of angina, chest pain. And the control group patients reported 165% rise in frequency. A study in 1988 was carried out with people with psoriasis, a chronic skin disorder. In the group that received standard therapy and practiced mindfulness for only 2 months, their skin cleared by as much as 60% versus only 20% clearing in the group that received standard therapy only. Then in 1989, Dr. David Spiegel, director of the Psychosocial Research Laboratory at Stanford University, did a landmark study that compared women with breast cancer participating in a support group that met 1 hour per week against those that didn't. The results showed that those who participated in a support group not only had a better quality of life and better symptom control, they had a 5-year survival rate twice as high as that of the control subjects. After the results were published, a physician made the comment, if a new drug had been shown to do that, it would be malpractice not to prescribe it. In 2 studies in 1993 and 1996, it was found that HIV-positive patients who were depressed were twice as likely to develop AIDS and to die of it than those without depression. And another study around that same time showed that 6 months after a heart attack, patients who were depressed were 6 times more likely to die than patients who were not, with all other risk factors being equal. These studies, amongst others, were considered revolutionary. Their results inspired new research and helped the field move into greater acceptance. Oakley Ray, Professor Emeritus of Psychology, Psychiatry, and Pharmacology at Vanderbilt University said, according to the mind-body or biopsychosocial paradigm, which supersedes the older biomedical model, there is no real division between mind and body because of networks of communication that exist between the brain and neurological, endocrine, and immune systems. Researchers were finally realizing that these interactions exist. And then Candace Pert, a world-renowned professor of physiology and biophysics at Georgetown University, proved it and became known as the mother of psychoneuroimmunology. In 1991, Dr. James Gordon from Harvard founded the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. And in 1992, the National Institutes of Health opened the Office of Alternative Medicine and gave it a $2 million budget due to consumer demand. Statistics then showed that 1/3 of Americans use techniques such as imagery, biofeedback, and hypnosis, and more than half use prayer as a complementary or alternative therapy. Because modern medicine has yet to cure many chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension, and still hasn't, many patients began to add these therapies to their conventional treatment with the hope that their quality of life and maybe even their prognosis would improve. But many never told their healthcare providers for fear of reprimand or ridicule. But fortunately, attitudes are changing. Nowadays, some physicians ask their patients what they're doing to help themselves in addition to what they've prescribed, and may actually refer patients for therapy such as meditation and yoga and others that we'll discuss soon. Unfortunately, the medical community still has a long way to go in this regard. Anyway, since 1992, the Office of Alternative Medicine's name changed to the National Center for Complementary Integrative Health, and rather than a $2 million budget, now has a budget of over $1.5 million. Or excuse me, $150 million. Hundreds of studies have been funded, and private foundations are also funding research. Some medical schools are including mind-body medicine in their curricula, like Georgetown University. And most major hospitals and cancer centers like Sloan Kettering now have integrative medicine programs which incorporate mind-body therapies. Today, there are many leaders in the field who are promoting these ideas by writing books and speaking worldwide. Some names you may be familiar with, like Dr. Deepak Chopra, Dr. Bernie Siegel, Dr. Lisa Rankin, and Dr. Andrea Weil. Now let's move on to talk about the two different ways the mind can influence the body. I think of them as being classified as unintentional and intentional. The unintentional aspect is how factors in our environment affect our emotions and attitudes, which in turn affect how we heal. These include our living situation, employment status, financial status, diet, marital status, etc. It's been reported that over 75% of patients visiting a primary care physician present with physical symptoms related to these psychosocial factors. One of the most important factors supporting good health is social support and being part of a community. Dr. Thomas Delbanco at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston said, "I know more about the body than the mind. It's probably the easier to study, and that's what we learned in medical school. 95% body and 5% mind. But I'll tell you, once you're in practice and you're taking care of real people, it becomes closer to 50-50. Similarly, Candace Pert said, "The body and mind are not separate, and we cannot treat one without the other." One good example of an unintentional effect on the body by the mind is that of placebos. The formal definition of a placebo is a substance that has no therapeutic effect and is often used as a control in testing new drugs. But many studies using placebos have unexpectedly found positive effects in the trial subjects taking them. A study will report, for instance, that 80% of the subjects responded well to the test medication, 15% had no response, and 5% responded to the placebo. The big question is, why would 5% of people in the trial get better if they didn't take the test medication? Could it be that just believing that something can help will help? The placebo effect is currently being studied in its own right, and it's been found that not only can placebos help people, but the color, size, and number of tablets affect the physical response. And interestingly, capsules and injections seem to have the best effect. Placebos can inhibit the release of stress hormones and promote the production of feel-good hormones. And imaging studies have even showed increased activity in various parts of the brain in response to only placebos. Dr. Bruce Lipton, a well-known biologist, said, "If medical researchers could figure out how to leverage the placebo effect, they would hand doctors an efficient, side effect-free tool to treat disease." Another very common unintentional mind-body interaction is that of the stress response, also known as the fight or flight response. This refers to a physiological reaction that occurs when we're in the presence of something that is threatening us. The response occurs when there's a release of hormones that prepare the body to either stay and deal with the threat or to run away to safety. In either case, once there's no longer a threat, the body returns to its normal state. In modern society, however, many of us are exposed to chronically stressful situations, and our mind and body often don't return to that original resting state. Instead, the body and mind enter a state of fatigue and exhaustion. A brief, immediate stress response does have an adaptive advantage, but if the response continues, it can be debilitating over time. The stress response elevates heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar, muscle tension, and respiratory rate. And chronic stress has been implicated in many conditions and diseases as listed here. The other aspect of mind-body medicine is when we intentionally use various therapies and techniques to help focus and manipulate our mind so that we create an environment in our body that supports the recovery process and our innate healing abilities. But before I get into the details of the actual therapies, I want you to understand how and why they work. I believe it's important for me to present this so you'll understand that this isn't airy-fairy stuff. This is real, researched, proven science. I'm hoping my explanation will convince you to at least try some of the therapies. And if you already do use some of them, I'm hoping this will motivate you to continue and to maybe try new ones. So this is an ultra simplistic drawing of a cell in our body. We have trillions of these of various shapes and sizes, but most have all of the same basic components. Cells are like mini factories that produce many molecules, with proteins being one of the main products. These proteins are used to keep our bodies healthy in thousands of different ways. The two pertinent cell structures are the nucleus and the cell membrane, as seen here. First, the nucleus. It houses our chromosomes, which are made up of genes, which are made up of DNA. DNA contains the instructions for making the proteins. An incredible and surprising fact was recently discovered that only 2% of the total amount of DNA is actually the instructions. It turns out that the remaining 98% actually determines which genes of the 2% get turned on or turned off, meaning expressed or not expressed. In the past, this 98% was actually believed to be useless junk. In other words, it's like the 2% is an orchestra and the other 98% is the conductor, telling which musicians how and when to play their instruments. Without the conductor, the orchestra is fairly useless. But with the conductor, music is not only made, but he determines how coherent and beautiful the symphony will be. The crucial point I want to make is that this 98% of our DNA, the conductor, can be influenced by environmental factors. So in our example, it's like the conductor's performance can be influenced by how cold or hot he is, whether his shoes are too tight, or if he's just been distracted by noise in the audience. The bottom line is that contrary to what we had always believed, our genetics are not cast in stone. Our genes can be influenced by multiple factors in our environment. This concept is a relatively new finding with major ramifications and has become a new field of research called epigenetics, which is growing with new discoveries all the time. To delve deeper and understand more of how this works, we need to turn to the other important structure, the cell membrane. This membrane surrounds every living cell and has molecules that protrude from its surface, called receptors, into which other molecules outside the cell dock and attach to. Okay, now to put this all together, here's the slide, and I know it can be intimidating, but please don't panic. I'm going to walk you through it. Start at the left upper corner where you see input from our social environment. Then follow down to the silhouette of the brain, labeled the central nervous system, which for our purposes represents our thoughts. Once we have a thought, informational substances like neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and hormones get released into the outer environment of the cell, represented here by the labels peripheral nervous system and endocrine system. These informational substances mediate many bodily functions, including our emotions, such as fear, pleasure, anger, and others. Now, going back to our slide, go down to the thick arrow shape on the surface of the cell. This represents one of the receptors I just described. When an informational substance depicted as the gray ball attaches to the receptor of, let's say, a nerve cell or an immune cell or a cell in the lining of our gut, it acts like a lock and key. When the key fits properly inside the lock, it sets off a chain reaction inside the cell that eventually affects the 98% of the DNA, the conductor, which then turns specific genes on or off. This translates into which proteins will be made, which in turn determines how our bodies will function, as seen on the right side of the slide labeled health and behavior. And here is living proof. This is an actual photo of immune cells with the lighted areas showing receptors for dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that mediates pleasure. So to quickly summarize, the kinds of thoughts we have can directly influence which informational substances are released, which in turn affects which genes get expressed, which in turn results in which proteins get made, which determines the status of our health. Positive thoughts cause the release of those informational substances that mediate cellular functions toward the path of wholeness and healing. Some fascinating scientific research in this area is currently being conducted. For example, by Dr. Steve Cole of the Division of Hematology Oncology and Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA, who has done several studies proving the effects of our emotions on a molecular level, specifically on the replication of viruses, the immune response, and the spread of human breast and ovarian cancer. Here's one of his studies on the negative effects of social isolation on breast cancer, and one in ovarian cancer. Another study by Dr. Dean Ornish was done on men with early prostate cancer who made lifestyle changes, including meditation. Genetic analysis showed beneficial effects in over 500 genes within 3 months of instituting the changes. Changes in gene expression included the turning off of genes that promote tumor growth and the turning on of genes that suppress tumor growth. And here's a study on yoga and one on mindfulness. Ivana Burek, a PhD student in neuroscience from the Brain, Belief, and Behavior Lab at Coventry University in the UK, sums this all up beautifully. Millions of people around the world already enjoy the health benefits of mind-body interventions like yoga or meditation. But what they perhaps don't realize is that these benefits begin at a molecular level and can change the way our genetic code goes about its business. These activities are leaving what we call a molecular signature in our cells, which reverses the effect that stress or anxiety would have on the body by changing how our genes are expressed. Put simply, mind-body interventions cause the brain to steer our DNA processes along a path which improves our well-being. Earlier, I spoke about the unintentional effect of the mind on the body. But how can we intentionally help keep our minds focused on positive thoughts as much as possible and create an internal environment that supports good health? One way is to practice positive psychology. This is a relatively new field of psychology based on the belief that people can lead happier, more meaningful, and fulfilling lives by moving their focus away from the negative toward a more balanced perspective. Humans are hardwired to pay attention to negative experiences. We have a propensity to pay attention to negative information far more than positive information. It's been reported that 70% of the thousands of thoughts we have each day are actually negative ones. That's not to say that negative emotions should be suppressed, They should be expressed, but in a healthy way, and then let go of as much as possible. Positive psychology teaches us how to move our focus on joy, well-being, and optimism. It emphasizes gratitude, forgiveness, compassion, serving others, being part of a community, actively learning new things, reframing, looking at a situation from different perspectives, giving hugs, and practicing random acts of kindness. Studies in positive psychology have proven that people who practice are less depressed and anxious, have stronger immune systems, lower blood pressure, and may even live longer. And the research continues. After learning about positive psychology a few years ago, I asked myself, wouldn't it have been great if we had some type of positivity manual when we were growing up? Just think, maybe we would be happier and healthier now as adults. I looked for a book written for kids on positive psychology to give to my grandchildren, but I couldn't find one. So I wrote one myself. And this is my book, Being Your Best Self, A Young Adult's Guide to Conscious Living, and it's available on Amazon. Okay, now that you understand how this all works, let's talk about the therapies. Mind-body therapies calm the mind, help us cope with stress, improve our body image, help us feel that we're thriving rather than merely surviving, give us more feeling of control over our health, make us an active member of our healthcare team, help us handle the fear and anxiety of disease recurrence, alleviate symptoms of disease and side effects of treatment. Now notice that I didn't list cure as a goal. Mind-body therapies can bring about cure for some illnesses in some people when used in the right combination under proper guidance and with consistency and dedication. And there are people who have cured themselves, but of course this isn't the norm. These therapies should be considered just one component, albeit a critical component, of a health maintenance program or a conventional treatment program, which may also include medications, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, herbs, supplements, and other supportive therapies. As with Freud's division of the mind, I like to think of mind-body therapies as being in the same two categories, conscious and subconscious. The conscious ones are those in which we direct our thoughts in a specific way to achieve a desired outcome. Subconscious are those that work more subtly and gently to rewire memories, past trauma, and negative emotions. Dr. Herbert Benson is a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and one of the pioneers of mind-body medicine. In 1975, he found that just as there is a human stress response with negative effects on the body, there's also a relaxation response that has a healing and restorative impact. This relaxation response is one of the main reasons mind-body therapies are so effective. His research showed that the relaxation response lowers heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, respiratory rate, and metabolism, and triggers the release of the feel-good informational substances. Mind-body therapies help us attain this relaxed state, which then makes it much easier for us to focus our awareness on positivity and wholeness. I'm now going to briefly describe some of the more popular and effective therapies. Please know that there is much more to each one, and I encourage you to read more about each of them. The first one is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, feelings, senses, and surrounding environment. We tune into the present moment rather than thinking about the past or the future. It involves using all our senses with focus and attention, noticing things in a brand new way. We focus on details that we may have never noticed before. Mindfulness helps keep our mind from jumping all over the place and from rehashing the past or worrying about the future. In addition to the studies I've already mentioned, other studies have shown mindfulness to reduce stress, anxiety, symptoms of depression, pain, blood pressure, and fatigue. It's also been shown to improve cardiovascular function and cognition in not only the elderly, but in those with Alzheimer's disease as well. It can improve the immune response, slow cell aging, and has even helped with weight loss. Meditation is a practice where we focus on something in particular, our breath, a word or phrase, a visualization, a physical object, or physical sensations within our body, and returning to that object whenever we get distracted or notice our mind starting to wander. This helps achieve mental clarity and emotionally calm and stable state. There are literally hundreds of meditation techniques encompassing practices from different traditions, cultures, spiritual disciplines, and religions. The benefits of meditation are many and are similar to those of mindfulness. Journaling. By writing down our thoughts, we can channel difficult feelings into healthy and creative outcomes. It's best to write with a pencil or pen on paper rather than typing on a computer, because then we're using the same part of the brain as when we're meditating. It helps to get into a relaxed state and then simply start writing. However, journaling in a specific fashion can help us get the most out of it. Some journaling ideas include free writing, reflection journal, and gratitude journal. Free writing means setting a timer and letting our thoughts just flow unedited and unscripted onto the page, or set a goal to write continuously for a specific number of pages. A reflection journal can be a safe place to look back on our day. It can help us process complex events and analyze why things happen in a certain way. Then we can look back on previous entries and see how we've grown, or write about our relationships and how communication can be improved. This technique lets us track our goals or any healthy habits we're trying to establish. A gratitude journal is where we write in detail about what we're thankful for and let ourselves feel the emotions surrounding that person, place, or event. This is one of the most powerful journaling techniques and has been proven in studies to make us happier and more productive. It's also been shown to strengthen the immune system, reduce blood pressure, improve sleep, and decrease symptoms of depression and anxiety. Try writing down 3 things each night before falling asleep that you're grateful for that happened to you that day. It puts you into a wonderful mindset and even helps you feel better when awakening the next day. Next is guided imagery. Guided imagery is a relaxation technique that draws on our ability to visualize and daydream. All we have to do is imagine a scene in our mind that makes us happy, content, and peaceful. It works best if we incorporate all our senses, so we're not just thinking it, we're living it. When we engage our imagination in this way, our body and our nervous system respond as if we're actually there. Another way to use guided imagery is, for example, to imagine bright white light surrounding and dissolving pain, or imagine chemotherapy as a magical healing elixir, turning cancer cells into normal ones. Imagery has a positive effect on heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, brain waves, temperature, and hormone balance. Yoga is an ancient Indian method involving stretching, breathing, and meditation. There are different forms of yoga and hundreds of poses. There are many studies on the benefits of yoga in relieving stress, anxiety, fatigue, pain, and depression by altering various hormone and neurotransmitter levels. Studies have shown yoga to decrease inflammatory markers, as we saw earlier, lower blood pressure and heart rate, and can even help lessen the side effects from chemotherapy. It can decrease sleep disturbances, improve sleep quality and duration, and reduce the need for sleep medications due to its positive effect on melatonin. Next is Tai Chi. This is an ancient Chinese tradition and originally used as a martial art form. Today, it's practiced as a graceful and gentle form of stretching involving a series of movements performed in a slow, focused manner and accompanied by deep breathing. Each posture flows into the next. Recent studies have indicated that Tai Chi enhances the immune system and relieves pain, anxiety, and stress. Qigong is another practice that originated in China over 5,000 years ago. It integrates posture, movement, specific forms of breathing, self-massage, sound, and focused intent. The movements are said to purify and circulate energy in the body, or what the Chinese refer to as qi. There are hundreds of Qigong styles and movements. Studies have shown Qigong to positively influence quality of life by decreasing fatigue, depression, and anxiety, as well as lowering stress-related hormones and improving cognition. It also has been shown to boost the immune system and decrease the inflammatory response. Art therapy involves the use of drawing, painting, collage, coloring, or sculpting to help us express ourselves in a creative way. With the guidance of an art therapist, we notice nonverbal messages, symbols, and metaphors in our artwork, which can help us better understand our feelings so we can move on to resolve emotional issues. Studies show creative expression helps maintain immunity, reduce stress, elevate mood, and lower blood pressure. Research also shows that patients who are exposed to art during a hospital stay actually heal more quickly and have a better overall inpatient experience. We derive the most benefit from these therapies if we do them with a trained instructor or therapist, but if you can't, many can be done on our own. For instance, just take out some markers and start drawing, or watch a comedy, or check out the hundreds of free apps and YouTube videos available on mindfulness and meditation. Now, I want to emphasize a point I made earlier. You can't expect significant changes in your health by just meditating once in a while or volunteering at a homeless shelter every few months. To experience significant health benefits, it takes commitment, dedication, and consistency. Do research and decide which therapies speak to you, which ones fit best into your schedule, and which ones would be the most likely to stick with. Only you can make the decision for yourself that you'll do whatever you can to heal. And then I encourage you to give it all you've got. And whatever happens, I'll bet that you'll be much better off than you were before you started. Now, for the last part of my talk, let's turn to the second category of therapies, those that work through the subconscious mind. Neuroscience has established that the conscious mind only affects our attitudes and behavior 10% of the time, while 90% of the time they're controlled by our subconscious. Your subconscious mind is the storehouse of memories, good and bad. All things that have ever happened to you are based on thoughts. All things that have happened to you are based on thoughts impressed by your subconscious mind, which then become your conscious beliefs. The subconscious doesn't reason things out like your conscious mind, and it doesn't argue. It accepts everything as truth. Negative, destructive thoughts continue to work negatively in your subconscious mind, especially those from childhood. Many people say, I don't want to delve into my subconscious. I don't want to know what's there and have to deal with it. But multiple studies have shown that abuse, neglect, dysfunctionality in the family, and past trauma can be connected with obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, chronic inflammation, and ultimately a shorter lifespan. In other words, what goes on in your subconscious needs to be dealt with if you want to be physically healthy. Subconscious mind-body therapies work very gently and easily by clearing these issues as well as blocks to healing and stuck emotions. And with most of the therapies, you don't need to verbalize what comes up for you during the session. These techniques replace negative thoughts with constructive, harmonious, conscious thoughts, which your subconscious mind then accepts, forming new and healthy beliefs. Here is a list of some of these types of therapies. For many of them, you start out doing them with a therapist, but once you know the technique, you can do them on your own as needed. These include emotional freedom technique, also known as EFT or tapping, modern energy tapping, known as MET, Tappist acupressure technique, TAT, hypnotherapy, breath work, emo, thought field therapy, or TFT, and the journey. More than 100 peer-reviewed studies have been done on some of these therapies, and over 50 have been randomized controlled trials. So to summarize, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, both consciously and subconsciously, have a scientifically proven effect on our DNA, and in turn, our quality of life and physical health. And each of us has the power to manipulate our thoughts, feelings, and emotions toward a path of healing. I want to end by saying that unfortunately, when going through an illness, we often become just a name on a medical file, or our diagnosis, or a record number. We're poked and prodded with needles and sent for this test and that test, and from one specialist to another. Mind-body therapies offer humanness, dignity, wholeness, and hope. They can help someone who is suffering from an illness become someone who is thriving despite their illness, and maybe even help us find purpose and meaning in what we're going through. This concludes my talk. Thank you for your attention, and if you'd like to contact me directly, I'm at kathy.pudiak@gmail.com.